Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And She Thrived is here to provide you with the tools that are so much needed when going through a divorce. We want you to know that you are not alone and that you are supported, and to provide you with these resources so that you may become more empowered and a better version of yourself. We want to hear from you and build community with you. So please do let us know in the comments how we might better serve you. Now enjoy the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to another episode on And She Thrived. I'm so pleased that today we have Anika Munshi back with us. So, Assalamu alaikum, Anika.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Nice to have you again.
Nice to be back.
So for those of you who have not watched our previous episode with Anika, I hope you will do that. She's a certified counselor and therapist, and she's based in Texas. And I will be linking her full bio, which her website is Sukoon Circles. I'll be linking that in the YouTube video for those who'd like to reach out to her and to know more about her background. So today we'll be addressing a certain topic that Anika feels strongly about. And in general, as she said, it's an overarching umbrella, and it's the heading of emotional immaturity. And why that would be important to people who are divorcees is that it's always a very positive step to reflect on our lives, on our marriages, and that includes looking back at perhaps the way that we were raised, so that we might be more self-aware, understanding ourselves, understanding our ex, and so that we do not continue the cycle and we break it, and we pass on more beneficial ways of communicating, interacting with our children. So Anika, I'm just opening up the topic for you, if you'd like to add anything more to the the introduction of it, so to say.
Sure. Alhamdulillah, I'm happy to be back and talking about this. I'm always passionate about talking about a little bit deeper subjects. It's very difficult to talk about some of these topics in our Muslim circles, especially, at the masjid. And so, I love that you have this forum here to be able to speak directly to divorced women. And, me being a divorced woman myself, I've gone through a lot of these challenges myself. And I see with my clients too, it's just the same pattern. So this is my way of saying, hey, if we're all going through all of this together, let's talk about it, Let's talk about this because it's a real problem in our generation.
Okay. So you've mentioned before that you find that this is a topic that's difficult to address within Muslim circles. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Yeah, even the term emotionally immature parents, there are people that are going to be turned off right there, and they're going to shut this video off, and they're like, nope, that's not my parents. My parents are awesome. Or I don't like talking about my parents that way. So one of the biggest obstacles to talking about this is that many people come in thinking that, parents are kind of untouchables. You cannot talk about them a certain way. It could be that it's our culture that's taught us to treat parents with a level of veneration. A lot of us come from authoritarian cultures. That means that we center ourselves around an authority figure. And also, a lot of us come from Eastern cultures, which are more collectivistic, which means that we work in a group and that we have that authority figure leading us, in certain ways. But what happens when that authority figure has gone through trauma, has gone through hardship, and they're incapable of playing that role? What happens is then that those responsibilities that are adult responsibilities get shared around, and that isn't always serving the family. Also, because we're Muslims, oftentimes what I see are cultural misinterpretations of the religion. First and foremost, it's those verses in the Quran that talk about, bir al walidain, or, not saying oof to parents. I can't tell you how many times that verse is quoted in situations that are completely out of proportion. In situations where kindness is being taught instead of learning how to protect ourselves from certain parents who are harmful to their children. So not being able to talk about that and instead focusing too much on obedience is actually harming our kids here. And I mean kids as in those ones who are now adults and now they have children of their own. And just to put this out there, we do have a general, in our cultures, we have a general culture of shame and silence and conformity. We're not rewarded for getting out there and having khutbahs and talking about problems. We're rewarded for keeping the silence. And I very much understand that, there are Islamic concepts about keeping some of these things private. But I believe that there's a how to talk about these things. And I think this is a good, platform to be able to speak about this topic. It's important that we are talking about this topic as objectively as possible. I understand that, we're talking about our parents and we all love our parents and we know they mean well. But something to kind of go into as we talk about this topic is to learn how to look at our parents objectively. What that means is we're trying our best to kind of zoom out, to look at them, without rushing to make quick moral valued judgments. And instead looking at some of those patterns, where did they come from? And what while doing that, we want to have a sense of compassion and empathy, of course. Compassion and empathy doesn't mean that we're going back to certain old, patterns that don't work, but it means that we are using that compassion and empathy to understand that our parents are also human beings. They meant well. They did the best that they could with the resources that were available to them. They're imperfect humans, just like we are, you know? And inshallah, we're going to do the best that we can do with the resources and knowledge that we have as of today. Okay? And that's that, inshallah.
Okay. I'm not sure if you'd like to address this now, but I am curious to know that how does one maintain that fine balance of having bir al-walidain, of doing what the Quranic injunctions prescribe, but at the same time not allowing the cycle to perpetuate.
I think that's something that we're going to be addressing. So what if we address that at the very end? Because it's important to understand what we're up against. Everyone's not up against the same exact type of parent. Sometimes it's one parent and not the other. And I think that definition is going to be a lot more clear, even though I think that what we're trying to do is to try to look at the gray here. It is an ambiguous answer, really. But I think after we have our talk, it might be.
Okay, sounds good. We'll put that in the parking lot for now. So many people use this term emotional immaturity synonymously with being narcissistic. And you did describe some of what that entails in narcissism in our previous interview. So what's the difference between the two?
So I look at emotional immaturity as this general umbrella term, all right? It's a term that I think it's been popularized by the book. The book is Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Also, we talk about, emotional intelligence. That's another way to talk about this topic. But emotional immaturity is a general term. It's looking at it from a developmental perspective, okay? Now, within that perspective, what we're saying is that, we all develop in certain ways. We develop cognitively, physically, emotionally, socially, even financially, and so on. And it's saying that as a human process, that these individuals, either were stunted in their development or they stopped growing because of their environmental factors, etc. And that narcissism is like, so if you look at it, emotional immaturity is the big bubble here, okay? And then narcissism is a pocket within that. And also, we want to understand that emotional immaturity is something that we're defining not as something that we do every now and then. Everyone gets, emotionally mature every now and then. But we learn from that experience and we move forward. But I think what we're talking about generally here is for these people, it's become part of their identity. It's part of their personality and who they are right now. And they have a very hard time changing that. So narcissistic patterns are part of it. There's also borderline patterns, to be very honest, and other personality disorders that kind of fit into this whole bubble as well.
What do you mean by borderline patterns?
That might be good for a different discussion, but
Yeah.
narcissistic and borderline tend to work together as a dynamic. They're
Mhm.
a very common dynamic in our culture, but it looks more like a person who has an emotional dysregulation disorder paired with a lot of impulsivity, may possibly self-harm. They're more likely to flood the scene with their emotions, or react very much so on their emotions, whereas a narcissistic person might claim not to have emotions in the first place. They're like an emotional desert oftentimes, so they're kind of they're similar, but at the same time they're very different too.
Right. So then by the definition you've just given, it sounds as if there are many, many people who fall into that category of being emotionally immature. So how did that happen? And could there be cultural or systematic factors?
Yeah, so when I say, I just want to make sure when we say narcissistic borderline, those are more severe clinical level descriptors. We all carry traits of this. And I'm just going to put this out there before I say anything, is that when we've grown up around these patterns, we are going to most likely replicate a few of these traits here and there, you know? But as adults, we are always given the choice, like, can we do differently from our parents, And that's the question that's left up to, all of you guys here. But to kind of talk about why this is so prevalent, I would say that it's a pandemic, it's an epidemic, whatever you want to call it. It is so widespread, that you're going to find this in every culture. It's universal that we're going to have emotionally immature people, and there are some theories for that. Okay, number one is that general emotional avoidance was something that our parents' generation, and before that, that was just the norm. you know it was the most mature thing to do, to avoid your emotions, because there may have been more traumatic things going on, such as war, or traumatic immigration, or it could be that the family itself had a great enough loss, or maybe there was a refugee thing happening. Whatever the situation was, is that there wasn't room for our parents or their parents' generation to have feelings in the first place. Because of that collectivism and that authoritarianism, individual feelings were seen as a threat to that social conformity. To have your individual feelings in this space where things possibly are unstable meant meant being it meant threatening that system itself. It meant being unsafe. It meant not having resources. But it's important for us in our generation to understand that having certain feelings are necessary for there to be growth. Otherwise, when we hold all of these feelings in, at some point they're going to come out. And we might see this with our emotionally mature parents, is that maybe they're still, crying about something small. Maybe they wanted just that ice cream or that attention, or that, you just sit there with them. They're still grieving some of these feelings. So that's one thing, is that they just grew up in a family that had a lot of beliefs around emotional avoidance, and they weren't able to grow and experience normal human emotions throughout their years. Number two, it could be that the family background had those certain traumatic issues. Maybe there was, sexual abuse. Maybe there was substance abuse, abandonment. There could have been other forms of attachment trauma, which is a very normal form of trauma these days. But whatever the case is, it could be a family that just couldn't provide the needs of the entire family, and you know that created people's identities a certain way. Another thing is that our parents themselves didn't believe in that kind of a connection, a close, intimate connection with their own parents, right? They grew up with this old school parenting idea that children are to be seen and not heard. Their parents weren't so much concerned about their children's feelings. That's a very modern phenomenon, but they were concerned about obedience, because obedience is what keeps you safe. Obedience is what keeps the family safe, or it maintains the family's honor. And those were the values of their time. Another last reason I think I want to add is that sometimes, there wasn't abuse or trauma. Maybe there wasn't a seriously, hard situation, but that certain individuals in the family were taught that it's not their responsibility to take care of their feelings, that other people around them are the ones who are supposed to take care of them. So there could be some privileging certain individuals, there could be some pampering, and that individual just never learned
Could
how
you
to
elaborate on that? What do you mean by that?
So a person, it could be that, and again, I'm just going to put this out there. Typically, we see this of men, is that the women are taught that it's not the man's responsibility to take care of certain feelings. It's that he outsources his feelings to the family, to the wife, and to the children, and it's their responsibility to anticipate the needs of, say, that man or that elderly figure or that whoever it is. Okay, sometimes it's the woman, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes the family is taught to kind of cater to the needs of that woman. Maybe she's a matriarch, maybe she's a mother-in-law, maybe she's holds some kind of power. Okay, but that system of one person's needs being privileged beyond everyone else's needs or feelings, yeah, that's a perpetual pattern that we see.
Okay, so you're saying that that would take like prime importance, and then other people's needs would be neglected.
Yeah, basically, or they're secondary.
Hmm. Okay, so with regards to having an emotionally, a parent who is emotionally avoidant because their needs were not met, and we see this sort of cry out for attention or help of some sort into adulthood, is there a way that that can be bridged in some way?
That's a difficult question, only because I want us to be careful. We're not saying that it becomes then the child's sole responsibility to then take care of their parent, because what I often see is that it's the children who become the parents, therapists and even like nurses and whatnot, and the child has to then play many different roles. And I understand that for some parents, some people, that they're not able to say afford all these other roles, and I get that we want to help our parents, but I think internally it's something that we have to check within ourselves. If we are holding our parents to too much of a high like sense of responsibility for them, and we feel extremely guilty and ashamed of ourselves if we don't fulfill that role, I think that's when it's a problem, because that's when we know that this thing is throwing us out of balance from our lives. If I, in that situation, then also have my own family to deal with, right? That's when we're putting something to too much of a high importance, and then everything else may be being neglected, you know? So it's not an easy answer, but I do want people to realize that yes, we do care about our parents. We're not going to neglect them, but we are going to understand that we want to overcome some of their distortions. They may want an immature style of relationship where you are the parent and they are the child, and that's not possible, because you are the child and they are the parent. And I get it, that was missed, but how I wish we had a time machine and we could go back and fix that, right? But most likely that parent also did not provide emotionally for this adult child. So for that adult child to then do and go over and beyond and give that thing, it takes a lot to do that. And what I'm saying is that we've got to be real with ourselves.
Right. And maybe this might be clarified more by the following question, which would be that what are some of the characteristics of having emotionally immature parents?
So there's several different things, and so I want to make sure I cover all of these different aspects. Again, there's a way more than what I'm about to say, but here are just some things. An emotionally immature parent, we're looking at a personality pattern here, which means this is just who they have become. We all become emotionally mature, like I said, at certain times when we're angry, upset, going through a crisis. That's normal. But for this parent, they are acting in this way and they refuse to change. Okay. So they could be very rigid, very, very one dimensional in terms of the way that they think. They have one right answer their way or the highway, basically. And they're not open to any differences of opinion. They are not open to having a talk about different perspectives because they don't see that as a waste of time, or it might make them feel something that they don't want to feel. It could also be that they create a lot of rules in the family. They love living by these rules. And again, harkening back to that authoritarian system, they think that that's a very simple way of thinking. Children should just obey. Parents should just follow these rules, and or vice versa, and everything is going to be okay. And if things are going not according to those rules, then there's people to blame for that, basically. But interestingly enough, I think this is very important to note that these parents themselves can't maintain those own rules. So you'll notice that they're finding loopholes or they're breaking those rules in private, or they may breaking big rules in private, So something's wrong with this rule system. Also, very important to notice is they have a very low stress tolerance. They get stressed very easily, and, they don't know how to cope with that stress. I would say that underneath all of that stress, okay, is a person who doesn't know what to do when they're stressed. It could also be a person who doesn't want to admit any kind of vulnerability underneath. They don't want to admit that they're making mistakes. They don't want to show up with that vulnerability and find closeness with another individual. Typically, when you're stressed, right? Think about a young child. When they're crying, what do they want? They want you to come and bring them close, right? But unfortunately, an emotionally mature parent is going to actively avoid that kind of intimacy. So it's like they're perpetually stressed.
So what's the inverse of that? For example, in a healthy relationship, like an emotionally mature parent, yeah. What would that look like then if there's a lot of stress happening? What you said that they what did you say? Something that they something about they can't see closeness. So then what would the opposite of that look like?
Yeah, so you see closeness. Intimacy means like emotional intimacy. When we're stressed and we're incapable because, again, all of this is pushing down on me, it's hard, that's when I reach out for help, okay? But it's important that when I'm reaching out for help, I'm not dumping and verbally vomiting and expecting you to rescue and fix me. So there's a balance with that too.
So you're saying it's like reaching out to that family member and saying, hey, like I'm struggling with this, or, even though I'm under a lot of stress, but I do care, like it's coming back to feeling like articulating the need and the vulnerability. Would that be like the healthy way of coping?
Yeah, in a healthy relationship, there's more consistency of give and take, and they're more used to reaching out. So it's not like they pile it up, and then there's a volcano building, and then boom, explode. Now you're supposed to fully take care of me, and you should be able to handle all of my words. No, that's not what it looks like. It looks like every time a feeling arises, it's like, I'm feeling some tension. Do you have 20 minutes to talk about it? Instead of like drop your family, drop your kids, just come and
like rescue, yeah, like SOS, right?
Exactly. So there's that. Also, sometimes when parents, by the way, about stress tolerance is that because they're not able to, reach out to others, they feel the need to do everything themselves. And in that case, sometimes you see that they do seek out intoxicants or medication, or they'll find something to be addicted to kind of
like dependency.
Yeah, they might be dependent on something. Also, that this emotionally mature parent might be ruled by their feelings, okay? Most likely, ruled by their feelings. Whether they are, like I said, narcissistic or borderline tendencies, they are going to have this need where those unconscious feelings are going to be driving them one way or the other. And oftentimes these individuals do react and make decisions based off of their feelings. They might think they're being the most logical person in the world, okay? But that something happened, they felt a certain way, and then they made a certain decision based on that. They may also use emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is when we say things like, I feel this way, therefore it must be true, So if they feel like you are avoiding and ignoring them and you're a horrible child, then you are. Okay. If I, it's also in like marital relationships, I hear this a lot. It's like, well, if I feel like you're attacking me, then you must be attacking me.
It's almost like black and white truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that. So it's either this or this. It's either you fit into their truth or you must be the enemy. You're villainized. And it all comes back to their feelings, is that their feelings manifest the truth for themselves. That's how they know. Let's see what else. They tend to be self-preoccupied. So self-preoccupation is not simply a narcissistic characteristic. It could be for many different types of personalities. It's when we have an internal wound. So imagine that inside of myself, I have like a bleeding heart, okay? But I've put lots of walls and barriers around my bleeding heart. I don't even want to look at it. And I don't want other people to know that, because then then this person's going to feel exposed for being somehow defective or inadequate or bad or whatnot, unwanted even. So what this person does is they constantly have this self-preoccupation, trying to protect and cover this thing. They want people to come close, but then they realize that they can't bring them too close, because then they're going to see all of this bleeding heart. But they're very invested. They invest a lot of time thinking about this. They invest a lot of time putting their defenses up and kind of thinking a lot about what would happen if people see that interior. Okay. So in addition to that, it's interesting because they do like to be the center of attention. They do like people to look at them and sometimes mind read what's happening on the inside without really being able to tell others what's happening in here. But it's such an inner conflict, as you can kind of see, is that here's something that really does need help and taking care of, but typically the people who are caretakers around them are unable to take care of the root of the problem. So it's like they're constantly being taken care of in other ways, but it's not enough. Why? Because it's not meeting the actual need. Okay. Another big one, and I'll end on this one, is that they promote what we call role reversal. This is a hallmark of emotionally immature parents. What that means is that they expect that their kids caretake them emotionally in a way that a parent would, a young child. And the child may have to then play the parent's therapist, the parent's, emotional caretaker, or they may expect their child to be happy and praise them and, pay attention to them, even after they may have abused or neglected that child.
So
So
sorry, what is this expectation here? Is this when the child is an adult or from childhood?
from childhood,
Okay.
these are some patterns that are established within childhood. Again, I want people to understand there might be a very good reason for this being so, right? They didn't have the opportunity to go to therapists back then, but they still had, hard situations in their marriage. There was oftentimes domestic violence. Like I said, immigration brought certain stress. They didn't have a therapist to go to. They didn't understand that feelings were important, right? So we want to understand that base. So unfortunately, though, their kids are the ones that are around them the most. And so it's very common to see that a child is either the therapist or the child is parentified in a certain way, which means that they play certain adult roles, even when, generally speaking, children are not developmentally capable of, these roles. Children are by nature emotionally immature because they're still developing. All right. So expecting them to do something that's not developmentally appropriate is going to actually it's going to bend their limits too far. So much so that when these children grow up and they are adults and parents themselves, they're already burnt out. They don't know how to be there for their own spouses, children. They might even look at relationships as very burdensome. So they're not even interested in coming close. And yeah, that kind of repeats the cycle.
Okay. And then as you mentioned, that since this is such a widespread phenomenon, it's it's inevitable that those children of such parents will adopt and acquire some of these traits.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have advice of how we might look to ourselves to, if we sort of, oh my God, like that's totally something that I thought I would never do and I just did. How do we combat that kind of thing? What do we look for?
I mean, most likely, I guarantee that someone's watching this and is like, yeah, you're talking about your parents, my parents, but you're also talking about me too. You know, I struggle with those things. And you know what? That's okay. All right. You are not going to follow into these other patterns that I've talked about. Okay. Alhamdulillah, you've caught this pattern early. You're watching this talk because you've probably paid attention to some of these things. You're observant and you want to do things differently. Okay. So unfortunately, yes, it's going to rub off on us because those are our parents. Those are our models for, what it's like to be a man or a woman. So we do have to kind of learn about their patterns in order to unlearn them as well. Okay. So few things that often show up. Of course, there are many things, but these are some things that I'd look for when we're looking at ourselves is number one, how am I able to cope with certain things? If we cope by becoming overly self-sufficient and then covering up all of our needs, then that's not a healthy sign. I see individuals who become overly mature too quickly. They mature way too early in life. Maybe they get jobs at an early age. Maybe they become more sexually active. They marry early. They carry some parental roles, or they become compulsive helpers, sacrificing themselves and their own needs. So those are signs that, this is something we've experienced. Oftentimes we repeat the same patterns in our adult relationships. So in our marriages, in our friendships, even at work with our coworkers and our boss, we're going to see other people in the same roles as our families. And our brain's going to be like, yep, that's just like your parent. And then you're going to step into action. And so know that it's not supposed to be the same way that it was growing up, that we can shed those childlike roles. Okay, we played those roles because we had to adapt to that situation. But now as an adult, we can shed ourselves from those roles. Um, sometimes my clients, oftentimes the women, feel very guilty for being unhappy. All right, they feel that something must be wrong with them. They're depressed, they're sad, they're anxious, something's going on, and they feel guilty because maybe they're not doing something right. And so they go about it with trying to really fix themselves and doubting their own needs. They come into therapy and they fix me, rescue me. And I'm like, you know what? Those are the patterns that we need to understand where they're coming from. Something I see more commonly with men is that they feel very trapped taking care of their own parents. Again, because it's a social duty obligation, but they feel like they can't get out of that cycle. A lot more guilt with the men that I see than the women because they are told to take care of those parents. They are the retirement plan.
Responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so difficult because they're constantly doing that. They don't have time to show up romantically with their own spouses. It's drained them so very much. And they think that being in an intimate relationship means being burdened or abandoned all the time. So can you imagine coming back into the romantic relationship and feeling like closeness is just too much for them? So I'd rather check myself out. Then also another thing I see both men and women is, lacking trusting their own instincts. They're used to always seeking the approval of their parents or of elderly figures. So what children learned from a young age is to doubt themselves constantly and to always ask people like, is this right? Are my eyes right? Are my ears right? Did I see that correctly? Whereas they're not focusing on that instinctual feeling. And I'm not talking about just a fleeting feeling. I'm talking about they really deeply understand this thing and they're so very afraid to talk about it because it feels very shameful or inferior. But that's very important for us to recognize within ourselves, is if we feel afraid of just showing up and speaking what's inside, and if it might be wrong, then it says a lot about who our parents were. And then lastly is that our my clients who have this situation have a very low self-confidence, and they're constantly afraid of rejection because their parents emotionally rejected them or abandoned them. They kind of enter the world as adults now, thinking that people are constantly going to reject or abandon them. So they've learned how to kind of be, excellent shapeshifters, so to speak, or people pleasers. And they know how to say the right thing, do the right thing, be very careful in the world because they've learned to protect themselves from the world's rejection. And doing that actually makes us feel so stifled. It creates a lot of emotional loneliness at the core. And I just want the viewers to know that this is how this whole cycle began in the first place with our parents, is that they felt emotionally alone with their own parents, with the world around them. So they used all of these techniques to kind of protect that feeling because it's wrong and inferior. But then they pass that along with their children. Now, as children, adult children, now we feel as if we can't be authentic and share our true selves. So we kind of, in a way, reject ourselves already.
Okay, so for this person who, this individual who might feel trapped and guilty and mistrusting of his or her own instincts and lacking self-confidence, what's the path for them?
So of course I'm gonna say go to therapy because I'm a therapist.
That's what I was waiting for, because that obviously needs to be addressed in some way, right?
Yeah, a lot of
In all
people,
of that. Mm-hmm.
again, this is such a broad topic. I know everyone has some experience of this. And so if you're thinking, you know what, I don't need to go to therapy. My parents were, you know what, they're fine, whatever. But still, learning about these patterns, it's important to go back to your parents. Of course, a therapist would say that, in order for us to examine our patterns today, even it shows up in marriages itself. And so we might be fixated on the fact that, well, my partner just sucks as a narcissist. But then we're playing a role too. Maybe we've learned some of these patterns from somewhere.
Okay, so then it's not just our parents. We might have an emotionally immature partner, or we ourselves might have been emotionally immature partners in our marriages. And so, what are some ways that this immaturity shows up in a marriage?
So many ways, okay? So many ways that I wrote a list down, okay?
Okay.
And it shows up, and oftentimes we're fixated either on blaming the other person or we're blaming ourselves, okay? Typically what I see is one partner thinks that they are absolutely right and you are wrong. Possibly the other partner is constantly doubting themselves, all right? But you may have this very emotionally immature uh, partner who thinks that there's one version of the truth, there's nothing but their truth, there's no room for multiple perspectives. So they come into couples therapy and they're like, tell him or her that they're wrong, okay? And I tell them, like, that's not what couples therapy is. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's really about understanding how you got here. All right, nobody wants to do that, of course. But what happens with this singular truth is that the other person is going to be gaslighted. The other person is going to be told that your eyes and ears and what you're thinking and feeling is wrong because, like, this person is the right person, so it's important not to be fixated on one singular perspective, because you know what, the truth is so versatile, it's so ambiguous sometimes. Oftentimes in these couple relationships, it's more about I and not we. Both partners may be focused on themselves in a different way. One might be more demanding and saying, yes, it is about me. The other one may not actively be saying that, but instead they're very focused on their feelings maybe, and they in that way are making it more about their own selves. Instead, we want to focus more on the we, which is there are two I's and then there is a we in this relationship. So focusing on both. Um, Sometimes you have a partner who has intense feelings, just always everything is at a very high intensity, intense rage, intense sadness, even happiness is like it's ecstatic, and then the other partner may just be an emotional desert. All right, they don't really have feelings, and when they do, maybe they do have intense emotions too, but you have these extremes, and so when you see extremes in a relationship, something's wrong here. Okay, just to repeat some of the stuff I've said earlier, you could have a partner playing the role of a parent or a child. Sometimes both do it to each other, while one is playing the parent, the other is the child, and then vice versa. So there isn't a relationship between two adults. To learn how to have a relationship with two adults, I think that takes work. To say a little bit more about that, by the way, showing up as an adult is understanding that the other person cannot fully take care of us completely. We have this idea that when you enter marriage, the other person should just complete me. They should fulfill all of my fantasies and everything. And if they don't, they're evil and bad. Okay. But instead, what we're saying is that that person is not responsible for everything, but that you share some things in common. Okay. This person could be so drained, like I said earlier, you could have a partner so drained from taking care of a parent, worrying about a parent, making their lives around that parent that they don't have room for that romantic connection. Also, you might notice a pattern in these relationships. It's called enmeshment. I'm just going to put it out there, hoping that you guys will Google it later. But just in brief, enmeshment is when it's not about connection and closeness, it's about intrusion and control. So this person's version of closeness is more like, I just want to overpower you in an intimate space, so to speak.
Is it positive? Like, is it smothering with a lot of attention
Smothering.
and love, or is it controlling and negative?
Yeah, it could be controlling and smothering. It also could be that they want to come really, really close and then like verbally vomit all of their thoughts and feelings, and you have to still stay there. And if you don't stay there while they're doing all of that, then you don't care about them. Okay. So it could be a variety of different things, but for them, they don't have boundaries, so to speak. So they show up in ways that might be too much in an intimate space. Okay.
So it's like almost like expecting what is reasonable from your
Yeah.
spouse. It's almost like what you would do in a therapy session.
Yeah. Think about it for a young child. Okay. When a young child, a very young child, shows up this way, you know, they're expecting their parents to still be there for them and love them and accept them. And you know what? They're not going to abandon or reject you, right?
Unconditionally.
So sometimes these behaviors serve as confirmation for themselves that, are you going to reject me or abandon me like my parents did?
It's almost like testing. Like, let's see,
Yeah.
do you really love me? How much
Yeah.
what can I do to, like, push you
Yeah,
to the limit, to test? Let me test you.
exactly. How can I push the limit so far so that I know? And sometimes it's that curiosity, or I will say anxiety, that pushes us to that place. Find that confirmation.
Or maybe because if the person has had abandonment issues, that, like, to affirm that you're not going to abandon me.
Yeah,
Or
sometimes
maybe
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, are you going to be exactly the same way? And then when you do, you're like, see, I knew
or
you were.
maybe it's even like uh, a person who has had such a negative and low self-esteem that it's almost subconsciously like that's what they want. It's almost like
Yeah,
they're almost waiting, they're pushing the person so that they will
yes.
leave.
And so when that eventually happens, it's like, see, that's what's familiar to me. That's what I know. Now gonna cry about it. Now I'm gonna be more alone. Now I'm gonna isolate myself, right?
Cycle
Or compare
continues.
to others, for example. But even if something is slightly different, sometimes the brain can't process that difference. You don't know what to do with it. And then it goes back to the same pattern again. That's when you know okay, we have an established pattern that needs to be broken, and we need to go to therapy to talk about it. I'll add a couple more points is that just what we kind of described here, all right? Even when this person feels victimized, it's oftentimes about their own feelings, okay? Whether they fall on one side or the other of the marital relationship, it is often about themselves and their own feelings. And I know that we don't always consciously try to make it about ourselves and our feelings, but what we're looking for is to find balance. I have feelings, you have feelings, I have thoughts, you have thoughts. We both have a perspective about what just happened. Let's talk about it. Okay. And then lastly, another point is that this is a little bit deeper, but this is how it shows up. So because both partners they come in with this idea that they're already a part of them that's rejected, okay? They show up then as people pleasers. So that means that they encourage their partner to also people please, like them, and to kind of cover away all those shameful bad parts. When they're out with their friends and family, they might encourage this person to put on a act, a performance for them. And what that does in an intimate space is that you're telling this person that I don't accept you for all of you. I only like those specific parts of you that make me look good. All these other parts is not my problem. you know so it becomes very hard to be in a space with your intimate partner when you can only show up in a certain way.
Okay, so that's about marriage. And so how do we not pass on the cycle and we encourage our children in mature, healthy ways?
So we're talking about you know your population is mostly divorced women, correct?
Correct.
Whether you're divorced or you're married, I think it's an obligation on us to not pass on these patterns, okay? Yes, when we're divorced, we don't have, the full control over what happens, but we do have our part that we can play, which is nonetheless still going to, inshallah, positively affect your children, even if it is one parent doing so. And when the child is around you, even having that different experience is going to help them see a different way of handling things, right? And that starts with our own example. So the first thing that I would do is that, live by that example. When you have feelings, respond to them appropriately. Learn what to do with those feelings. Don't repeat some of the same patterns of making your child your confidant. Don't dismiss and invalidate your children's feelings. Understand that children are going to be more emotionally mature. That doesn't mean they're going to turn out like your ex-partner or your parents, for example. Sometimes we do that kind of comparison. Understand that for a parent, it's about taking care of your own feelings first and also your children's feelings, okay? This is a very hard thing to do. When we don't know how to take care of ourselves, then we might show up very frantic, very anxious when our children have feelings. And we might repeat these patterns of, rescuing and fixing them, when instead our children sometimes just want us to be there with them while they're having the feeling.
So you're saying that the parent should strive to be more grounded and internally present and connected and regulated, so that he or she can hold the other child emotionally.
As much as they can, but that doesn't mean that we show up fake in front of our children if we're going through something. I would tell my child, I'm really, really upset right now, but don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. But, are you okay? I want to make sure you're okay. We don't have to be this fake person. Let me tell you,
Right.
children
It's
can
like
read right
acting.
through it.
Right. And I think that they also appreciate that kind of honesty and vulnerability, because I feel it models to them what it's like to take emotional responsibility, and that it's okay to have these emotions, so then they're more self-attuned. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So it's important to let your kids have feelings. Feelings can't harm us. We can talk to our children about telling them that, feelings are like messages from the body. Just like, hunger is a feeling, thirst is a feeling, feeling sleepy is a feeling. And then we use that feeling to then do something about it. Well, just like that, actually, I teach my kid vocabulary for these emotions. Our parents didn't have the vocabulary, right? So I teach my kid what he feels like when he doesn't get attention from me, so that when I ignore him, he's like, Mama, I feel ignored. I appreciate it when he tells me that, because then he can also put a name to that feeling and then communicate that to me. And then I'm like, oh, you're not just acting out, you feel ignored. Okay, thank you. um, it's really important for us to model that healthy communication. So when we are not feeling right, our children are going to see right through that, right? So it's important to tell our kids, I'm actually feeling a little frustrated about something right now. And the kid's like, oh, can I do something? Their children are gonna want to caretake you. And at that moment you can say, I think I just need a little bit of time to call a friend, or I need to call my mom or
But
something.
can you just say something simple like, I'll take care of it, but I just want a hug. Can you give me a hug?
Yeah, you could do that. Children feel like they're on top of the world when they can give you something.
Right.
So exactly what you're saying is like, you know what, but I could really use a hug right now. And then they hug you, and then you smile, and then they leave, and they're like, oh, that's such a good kid.
Yes,
And
I did something right. And it's so incredible to see when our children model the kind of empathy and care that we give for them.
yeah,
They say the same things back.
exactly. And it's important to teach our kids empathy. They need to learn that we as adults have feelings too, and that, again, developmentally, what is appropriate for them to do, they can do. So for a young child, giving a hug and a kiss is like the most they can do. Okay. But maybe for an older child, maybe, you can explain to them for, short conversation why you're doing, or why you're going through this, and what you're doing to resolve that. That also teaches those kids what they can do.
Okay, sounds good. So we are with strategies for dealing with the emotionally immature parent.
Yeah, so this is the hardest part, okay? So no one session talk is going to resolve this years long worth of a problem. So I'm already going to tell those people who are watching this that it is a journey to even come to this place of acceptance, compassion, empathy for your parents. And you know what? It's not going to look like what you think it looks like right now. So you asked the question in the beginning, right? Where it's like, okay, well, what do you do, right? We can't answer that until we've gone through the process ourselves. And that process looks like, first, just developing the skill of being able to, view our parents with like a detached observation. So now it's kind of like you're an investigator, and you're just objectively looking at the patterns that are happening. You're like, okay, when I do this, this happens, and then that happens. Then things don't change. And then it repeats. And it just goes through this constant infinity loop. Okay, all right, time to do something about it. I can't just stay helpless in the situation forever. Okay. Another thing we're going to have to accept is that our parents are not the most important people in the world. I'm sorry to say this. That doesn't, our lives do not revolve around our parents' feelings in particular. Okay. All right. That is a hard point to understand. Yes, our parents are important, but they're not the most important, and that their feelings are not our sole duty and our obligation to revolve around that. Because when we do that, in a way, we're kind of worshiping their feelings. And sometimes we need to let our parents experience difficult emotions. It's part of maturity, something that they missed out on. It's important that they learn how to self-soothe. Okay.
If you're saying that they are not the most important, then would you be able to assert what you think is the most important?
I think the most important thing is the truth, and I'm saying this as a Muslim, that seeking the truth is what we're after here. We're seeking to worship Allah. And when we're worshiping Allah and the truth itself, well, you know what? Then it becomes ambiguous what you have to do around it. it doesn't look very one-dimensional. And if I just do this, then I'm excellent. The truth might look like, saying, Mom and Dad, I'm here for you, but I know you're going through more than what I can handle right now. And so I'm going to have to step away. Or, hey, Mom, I know you want to tell me about all of your problems with Dad, but I only have 30 minutes and then I have to go. Having some wisdom to know that we have a particular energy capability. We don't have
Right.
we can't serve and give all of this energy and time and whatnot solely to them, because then we're going to, neglect something else.
Right. And that linked to what you said earlier, that part of the truth and being a good Muslimah is taking care of your children and also your marital relationship as well. So it's like this perfect balance. And so if you are expending so much of energy in this one category, then other areas might suffer, and then you are not a highly functioning Muslimah.
Exactly. And an emotionally mature parent would understand that. Yes, they all have crises. We all have crises, and we might have to give more during certain times. But if that becomes a perpetual pattern, and that's their way of getting your attention, and then they bring you close, and then they control you in that space, now that's an unhealthy pattern. We got to, become a little bit more detached to observe that pattern. All right. If we're constantly in the same space, it's hard to see that. It's also important to accept that we can't be their parent. That yes, they had it hard. We can empathize with them. We can acknowledge that for them. That they didn't have the parents that maybe we are modeling for our children. Sometimes the parents see the way we act with our kids, hopefully in more healthier ways, and they're like, why can't you do that for me? And it's like, you know what? I can't be that person for you. It's just different, you know? Also, it's important to accept that they can't maybe be there for us in the way we wish that they could be. And this is really hard because it means giving up on false hope. Sometimes we have this healing fantasy, this false hope that they're going to go to therapy and do all of the work that we did and then perfect themselves so that then they can give you that love that you need, and then you're going to feel fully healed, and we need to put that into perspective, is that they may not do all of that. And I know for a lot of adult children, all that they are looking for is a simple acknowledgement from their parents that, you know what, I acknowledge the pain that you're going through, that you have gone through. I couldn't be there for you in the way that you needed me to be, but I had certain circumstances. To acknowledge both their truth and their child's truth at the same time. That's something that I do in therapy between parents and children. But simply that can change the game entirely, But it takes adult children to understand sometimes that their parent might not be able to get there. They can't go over all their shame and feelings of inadequacy to be able to say that. They might even react.
And if
Like,
that never happens,
yeah,
not all is lost, because then we would have to learn how to self-parent.
exactly. So reparenting is a thing.
Right, that's the word. Yeah.
Therapy, learning how to be the parent for yourself in the way that you wished that your parent would have been there for you. So it means learning to kind of rely more on yourself instead of your surroundings. It also means to stop playing this role of rescuer and fixer for your parents or for your children or for your spouse. That role isn't going to, work for us in the long term. At some point, we're going to burn out, and it's important to understand that people need to learn how to self-soothe. Yes, we can help them. Yes, we can, offer them our suggestions or solutions, but it's important that we understand it's their choice at the end of the day, whether they want to get out of this or not. And we can make that choice for them. Okay. Another point is to give ourselves the freedom to be ourselves. It's okay to be different from your parents. In fact, learn to define who you are, define your values, define your beliefs, know who Allah is, what is the purpose of your life, and why do you exist? What are your goals in life? Don't let your parents define reality for you. And don't let them put you into restricted or perfectionistic roles. Okay, I have had to learn my religion all over again because I had the religion understood from my parents' worldview. And I'm telling you that the religion is universal, it's timeless, and that it isn't, it's made for all. We need to understand that. It took an extra effort out of me to deconstruct the religion from my parents' understanding and then learn to reconstruct it because, our religion is moldable to an extent. It provides the backbone, but cultures and norms do change. And so we have to understand what can be changed and what needs to remain. I say do a mental cleanup, hire a therapist. There are a lot of feelings left over. Sometimes people come into therapy and they're like, I've already accepted that. I already accepted my parents are like emotionally mature. But they have this residue of feelings that's still trapped all the way deep in there somewhere. And that needs to be, cleared out. And also it's very normal to feel feelings of grief. It's normal to grieve over the fact that you wished your parents could be a certain way, but you're stuck with the parents that they are today. You know, it's okay to want to grieve over that fact, and it takes time. Yeah. Let's see what else. It's important to learn how to set boundaries and learn to communicate effectively. I wish I could have a whole session on that. A lot of books and resources are
On
online.
boundary setting?
Boundary setting, especially with parents. I think that could be its own session to learn how to set boundaries with your parents, but I assure you it's possible. There's a way to do it. Sometimes it means overcoming our own fear of upsetting their feelings. Okay, sometimes in setting boundaries, I hear this all the time. They're like, I want to set a boundary, but I also want them to be happy about it. And I want them to approve of it. And I'm like, you can't
have your cake and eat it too, honey. Right. And sometimes by setting your boundary, not everyone's going to be like all happy clapping about it. Right.
At the same time, we can be tactful. We can say, Mom, Dad, I love you. I care about you. But here's how much I can actually commit to. And I'm letting you know that I'm not abandoning you or leaving you. I am just showing up how much I can. And I hope that you can see that. And leaving, letting them sit with that feeling. I'm sure, inshallah, that they are going to be able to process that over time. And eventually, I think I have to end with this, is that on your own time, this doesn't happen overnight. Again, we think that things should just change after hearing this session, for example. But I'll tell you from personal experience, it's taken me years, many, many years, to come to this conclusion. And the conclusion is that we understand that our parents are products of their own circumstances, of their time, of their generation. It took me to learn how to be more emotionally mature myself and to widen my perspective, to understand that many people are going through the same thing. Well, maybe it's not my parents, maybe it's a systemic issue. Maybe it's an issue of a certain time or era, or maybe culturally there are certain beliefs. And you know what? That's all our parents knew. If they knew what we knew today, I'm sure things would be different, inshallah. And with that understanding comes a level of compassion and empathy for our parents. And that means that we're learning to redefine this relationship, knowing deeply who they are, where they've come from, what experiences we've had. And after setting limits and rules and then redefining that relationship differently, then showing up and doing the best we can. Sometimes it looks like only seeing them for a short amount of time, because that's how much you could be able to handle. There's with my client I was mentioning actually just yesterday, I was like, you're going to have to figure out where the sweet spot is. For some people, it means calling their parents once a week. Good for them. Maybe it means going over to their place once every, month or so. For some people where it's really too difficult, it means only showing up maybe twice a year or once a year on Eid. And maybe they can only restrict the conversations to superficial conversations about, just like maybe the weather, maybe, let's all go out, but you can't talk about your personal things. And so with maturity within ourselves, understanding where our parents are at, we're able to redefine this relationship, and we're able to have empathy. Okay, they're human too, we're human too, of course, but it doesn't always look like us serving them in the role that we had growing up. It looks different. And for every single person, I don't know what that is. Come to therapy and maybe we can define that together, inshallah. But it's possible, inshallah.
Yes, and the overriding thing I'm getting from this is the importance of having to be proactive. It's all
Yes.
being proactive, being critical and insightful and wise, and so it's been very enlightening. Thank you so much, Anika, for your time, and I look forward to having follow-up conversations linked to what we spoke about today. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.